Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series, we're following Garry Kasparov's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the 1985 World Chess Championship between Karpov and Kasparov, and we have reached now really the critical moment of the super final. We're now in the game 16. So far, the result was equal: 2 wins for Kasparov, 2 wins for Karpov, but still Kasparov needed to make something happen, because if the result would have stayed equal to the end of the super match, then Anatoly Karpov would stay, of course, the world champion in chess, because Anatoly Karpov had draw odds, and it was really time for Kasparov to take the lead in the tournament. And this game 16 is really incredible. We'll witness now really one of the wildest night outposts in chess history. And I remember Magnus Carlsen, after a win against Sergei Karyakin, he played also really a great, outstanding night outpost in the Sveshnikov Sicilian against Karyakin with the black pieces. And then he was asked by the commentator, what do you think about your outpost? It was a great night in the center of the board. Then he mentioned, well, it wasn't so great like the night by Garry Kasparov from the World Chess Championship in 1985. You see also why, because in this game we'll witness a night outpost without the support of a pawn. Most of the times we're playing night outpost with the support of the pawn, but here it's not the case. Here the knight will be supported by the bishop, and will be really one of the most beautiful knights even in chess history. So let's check out now the game. Here e4 played by Anatoly Karpov, c5 by Kasparov. We have knight to f3, e6, the French Sicilian. We're trying d5 pawn breakthroughs. These are the main ideas of blacks here. We have d4, c takes d4, knight d4, knight c6, main theory. We have knight to b5. We have the so-called Shen variation. The Shen variation is an immediate idea to get a very annoying knight to d6 move, so that's why it forces now black to play d6 himself. Here c4. Here Karpov builds the so-called Maroczy bind setup. It's similar to the Maroczy bind against common Sicilian setups. We're having, of course, a very powerful control of the d5 square. What we want to do from white perspective is really play slowly here. Maybe play first f3, bishop to e3, queen d2, bishop e2, knight c3, maybe this knight to a3, castling, and then trying to push this pawn maybe to f4, then really slowly preparing these moves, a3, b4, and similar stuff. What black is trying to do here is to create outposts, is to fix maybe a knight here around the square c5 or e5. We can see that an outpost around c5 is maybe possible, because we can support the outpost further with a5. On e5 it would be more riskier, I think, because then you risk some f4 moves. The other possibility for black here is, instead of this fixation around dark squares, is a light square pawn breakthrough. So it means with a6 b5 preparations or with d5, but many times you have to prepare this d5. This d5 move has to be prepared further with some maybe rook activity, with rook to d8 and similar stuff. And the cool part about this game is that Garry Kasparov will play really an early d5 pawn breakthrough without even the support. He'll play sort of a gambit line, and that's why this game became really dynamic in an early stage of the game, which is really incredible. That's why it's really one of the even most beautiful games, I think, in chess history. So knight to f6, knight to c3, a6, knight to a3, and now we have this move d5. It's really creating already some madness in the center of the board. C takes d, e takes d, e takes d5, and now knight to b4. Knight to b4. Here bishop to e2, played by Karpov, and now bishop to c5. Here, if you try, for instance, to take immediately, instead of this bishop to c5 move, you're lacking a little bit in development. Castling, knight takes c3, we can take, b takes c3, and you see now the king is a little bit in danger. The king will stay here in the center of the board. This bishop's activity is perfectly fine here by white. Bishop to f4, bishop to f3, rook to d1, rook to b1, knight to c4, knight to b6 are possibilities. So it's not a good choice, I think, to take out this pawn immediately. So for the move d5, here it's, as I said, already dynamic, although the engine doesn't like this move. The engine suggests here the move move queen to a5 with a serious threat, of course. Knight takes e4. White could maybe play the move bishop to d2, but now after bishop to e7, it seems so that this move knight to d5 is very, very dangerous, but it's actually not. We can simply retreat with queen to d8, and after knight to e7, queen to e7, it's again a nice possibility, I think, for black to play the move d5 to break here the position in the center. But what you can notice now, this is a bad bishop. It's blocked out simply too much by these two pawns on c4, e4, and I see only 2 games here in the database, and both are won by black in this particular line. It was in an international master level, but still it's not so it's not such a huge advantage, I think, here for white to have the bishop pair, and the evaluation is even about 0.0 for both sides. So here, as I said, knight to a3, d5, e takes d. We have here trades of pawns, and now after bishop to e2, bishop to c5, and now castling played by Karpov. Kasparov also castles. We have now here bishop to f3. Instead of this castling idea, Karpov has, I think, here a great move which simplifies the position, very good for him. Bishop to e3, and after bishop to e3, you don't want to take, because this is a weak pawn. You have weakened your dark squares. Actually, the best move here is queen to a4 with a check, and if you try, for instance, bishop to d7, then queen to b4, and after bishop queen to b6, queen takes b6, bishop to b6, and suddenly I think it's a simplified line in which white has an extra pawn, and black has to prove his bishop pair here. But I still think in the simplified lines that when you have an extra pawn, then at least I don't think that Anatoly Karpov would lose this position. He would simply play castling, placing the rooks on e and d file, supporting this extra pawn, and I think black has had really some trouble. So that's why here, instead of this castling idea, bishop to e3 maybe slightly better. Here castling played by Kasparov. We have bishop to f3. This pawn is protected, but actually it's not that this pawn is only protected. The problem is now your bishop is also blocked out, so it isn't good when it comes to bishop's activity. It's of course an extra pawn, but here it gives now Garry Kasparov the opportunity to activate all of his pieces. You see now his bishops are on natural squares. They're attacking both sides of the board. The knight is very active. This knight will become active. There are routes maybe to improve the knight's activity with knight to d7, knight to e5. So this pieces by black will find better ways into the game. In the game now, bishop to g5, which is a natural idea here by Anatoly Karpov, pinning the knight. And what the cool part now about Garry Kasparov's game is that he's not bothered by this pin. He simply continues to develop his pieces on the most and active squares. Rook to e8, we have queen to d2, and now b5. Rook from a to d1, supporting the pawn further. We have knight to d3, and we have reached now this immortal knight outpost. This knight will be really one of the most annoying knights in chess history. You see how this knight is dancing all over the board. It's supported by the bishop. It's not supported by the pawn, and that's what Magnus Carlsen meant in his comment after the move knight to d3. This knight cannot be kicked away by any minor piece. So you see, it's already here we're threatening here to move b4, getting the fork on both of this knight. So here Karpov has to be careful. He plays now rook from a to b1, although maybe here d6 would be a much better move, at least creating some kind of counter-attack, but it's already a much better position here for black, although you have created this attack against the rook. If you try, for instance, knight to e4 to pin the knight, it's not such a good choice, because we can simply take here. Bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, and here after knight to e4, you can maybe take out the queen, but white will lose also the queen. And actually there is even a better move. Here you can play knight to f2. You don't have to even take out the queen in this particular line. Here if you try queen to c2, we'll simply take out the rook with check, and again here knight to f2 with a new check, knight to h3, and here we can play knight from d to f2. Again, you have to now sacrifice the queen. If you try to take out with the rook, then rook to e1, you have some backward problems, and it's checkmate. So really wild line. You don't have to even, as I said, take out the queen. So battling here and trying to cut off the connection between the bishop and the knight is not a possibility here for white. Knight to b1 had to be played, but as I said, maybe d6 slightly better, at least some kind of a counterattack. But the move knight to b1 is really passive. It gives now, I think, Garry Kasparov a pleasant game. h6, kicking away the bishop, bishop to h4. You see b4. Every next move by Kasparov is an attacking move. Knight to f4, bishop to d6. One of the main ideas when you have an advanced pawn is to create a blockade. But the cool part about Garry Kasparov games here is that his moves, although they're good defensive moves, but they're also great attacking moves. So it's not only a blockade, it's also an attack against the h2 square here. So bishop to g3, Karpov competes now on the dark squares. We have rook to c8, and there is this rule which says to take is a mistake. So that's what I really loved here by Kasparov's game. He didn't trade off, of course, the bishop, because he kept the tension. Here it was after b3, we have g5, bishop to d6. It was Karpov that took the bishop and invited again the queen into the game. So it's a huge, it's a different story. Instead of if black would have taken the bishop, then we could lose maybe a decisive tempo. Now with bishop to d6, queen to d6, here the queen comes out very, very actively, and we have now new attacking possibilities. g3, we have knight to d7. As I said, we want to remaneuver our knight here to e5, or maybe even to c5. If you try, instead of this g3, to compete here with this knight on b2, if you try to challenge finally the knight, it's not again a good choice. We have here knight takes b2, queen to b2, and now g4. The problem is now after bishop to e2, you get this one, rook to c2, and your bishop is trapped. So that's why knight to b2 is not a possibility. And you see now this knight is now on the edge of the board. This knight is out of game. Really a bad knight here. This knight is still really the best piece on the board. So here g3 and knight to d7. As I said, bishop to g2, queen to f6. We have a3. Finally trying to break the position, but it's nothing is changing here. We have a5, we can support the pawn further. We have now a takes b4. Still this pawn is restricting this knight's ability to jump somewhere. As we said, this knight is now out of game. We have queen to a2, bishop to g6. Kasparov improves first his minor pieces, then he'll strike d6 finally, but it comes a little bit too late. g4 now. This pawn is, of course, creating this very, very nice restriction. You cannot play h3, you cannot play f3. If you do that, then you weaken the dark squares. Then queen to d4 could be a possibility with knight to f2 and similar tactics. Queen to d2 played by Karpov, and now king to g7, improving also the position of the king. Here Garry Kasparov is waiting like a cobra. First he improves, and then he'll strike king to g7, and now comes this idea f3. If you want to compete with this pawn, I think maybe h3 is slightly better. At least you're not weakening the pawn structure here. After h3, maybe g takes h3, bishop to h3, and now rook to d8. Maybe it would be even a good choice to give up finally this bishop for one of these knights, because these knights are very, very dangerous. They could come here to f3, but then if you even do that, then you're vulnerable to some light squares. Your light squares are very, very weak, so it's again a bad position, but still maybe at least you're not weakening here this long diagonal in this particular scenario. After the move king to g7, we said f3, but now queen takes d6 by Kasparov. We have f takes g4, and now queen to d4. Now comes this decisive check, and it's really, really a losing game now. After king to h1, we have knight to f6. Again, Kasparov regroups. He gets first all of his pieces in the attack. I think many of us would consider the move knight to f2 immediately. Here comes now the move rook to f4. If you try knight to b2 to compete somehow here, it's again not a good choice, because we get simply knight to e4, and you could maybe try here queen takes d3, but now knight to f2, you get the fork, and it's if you try rook to f2, then queen to f2, and here also rook to e1 is a serious threat. The queen is hanging, so simply too much tactics going on. So the coordination of black pieces is simply too much to handle. So as I said, this was the possible continuation after potential knight to b2. Instead of that, here rook to f4 was played, which is even worse because you get knight to e4 anyway, and here queen takes d3, but now comes the stunner knight to f2, the fork, rook to f2, and now bishop to d3. Here if you try, for instance, to to get out of the range. Then you get the knight to h3, here king to h1 can be played, and now we can maybe try to take out. Queen takes d3, rook to d3, and you get rook to e1. You have to cover with some pieces, bishop to f1, and now bishop to d3 is of course winning immediately. So really wild stuff. You have some back rank problems. You see after the move rook to f4, you have left your back rank unprotected. So here after the move knight to e4, queen to d3, knight to f2 was played, rook to f2, we have bishop to d3, and now rook to d2. What Karpov was hoping for, that he can at least grab the bishop, but now comes queen to e3, a great move by Kasparov. We have rook takes d3, but now rook to c1. It's a great move, creates really some madness on the back rank. We have talked about this, so back rank problems are very important to notice. We have rook to c1, knight to b2. Again, Karpov is trying to get his pieces somehow into the game, but it is simply too late. Here queen to f2, very cool move, getting this other rook into the game. Here in the game, knight to e2 was played. If you take, as I said, here rook to c1, then rook to e1 wins the game. Rook takes e1, queen to e1. You can only cover this with the bishop, but after queen to f1, it's checkmate. So here after move queen to f2, we have knight to e2, but again rook to d1, knight to d1, and now rook to e1. In this position, Karpov resigned with the same idea. You can only cover with the bishop, and it's game over. So incredible game. I think this was probably part of Garry Kasparov's preparation. As we said, he had some troubles in this particular line, found really great ideas here. Knight outpost, getting piece activity, didn't take the pieces, stayed really compact, stayed very active, played on counterattacks. Really beautiful game, I think, although it wasn't maybe so sharp, but creating this blockade with ideas to attack with the bishop with really nice piece activity. I think in my opinion this was so far the best game from this super final. So okay, with this game Garry Kasparov took the lead. So now it was Anatoly Karpov that was under pressure. I think Garry Kasparov before this game 16 was really under pressure because he had to make something happen. So now the table has changed a little bit. Karpov has to do something in order to at least equalize the result and stay the world champion in chess. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. I've watched it many times, I've analyzed it many times. Really beautiful and immortal chess game. If you want to see more games by the legendary Garry Kasparov, check out my whole series from the beginning, from his path, his really path to glory. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.